Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. I've been away for a while, but I'm glad to be back. And today I want to talk about photographing children at play. I know that it's a frequent subject for photography, especially for people who have kids. And I wanted to talk about how to do that effectively, how to photograph children at play and do a really good job. And if you've been listening to this show for any period of time, you know how often I'm talking about owning the frame and how it's important to look beyond the subject and look at everything else to effectively make a great photograph. And I'm pretty much beating that same drum again here, because I think it's paying attention to light, the background, the foreground, and all the different elements that you're including in the frame that can really make the difference in creating a successful photograph of children at play. I chose three photographs. The first one is by Paul Hoogeveen, shot with a Panasonic LX7 at 1/2000th of a second at f4 at ISO 100. Now, Paul has a challenge here because he's shooting during the middle of the day. And the light typically during that time is the worst. It's overhead. It creates these very hard, harsh shadows. It can obscure the face in shadow. But I think Paul does a phenomenal job here in photographing this child playing with his partially inflated soccer ball. Now, the overall light is pretty hard. It's pretty nasty. But that quality of light does a lot of good things here. First off, it makes those colors pop. The red of the shirt, the blue of the door, the yellow of the door frame, the green of his shoes, and the ball all have just incredible vibrancy as a result of the fact that the light is the type of light that it is. If this was shot in shade or under a cloudy sky, these colors would lack that vibrancy. And though it is a very harsh quality of light, it really strengthens and makes more important those colors that are within the frame. That light also creates that very dramatic shadow, which kind of distorts the shadow of his hand to make it look like a pitchfork or some sort of claw, which really adds a level of tension to the shot, which is just of a child having fun. But that shadow, man, it really grabs your attention here. So the overall setting is really sort of interesting. So I haven't even talked about the kid yet. I'm talking about all these other elements that I'm thinking about that are drawing me into the frame. And that's the kind of stuff that I think is important to pay attention to. Paying attention to light, paying attention to what's happening in the background, paying attention to color, especially color contrast. And then we have the boy and the gesture of his body as he takes a leap from that step down to the ground in order to kick the ball. The gesture of his outstretched hands, the way his legs are positioned as he takes the leap, all of that produces a really sort of interesting shape within the context of the frame. And then we have his expression. You know, he has that tongue just sticking out just a little past his lips as he's very intent and very concentrated on what he's doing, which is one of the things that is great about photographing kids at play, is because they may see the camera and at first they may mug for the camera, but after a while they get so focused on what they're doing that you're invisible, giving you a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to move around and try to make a good photograph. And I think what makes this photograph good are all these elements that I'm talking about. The lighting, the color, the contrast of the color, the gesture, the shadows, all of those things coming into play, because you look at this frame and everything in this frame seems to belong there. There are not a bunch of distracting elements in the background that detract from this moment and all the things that make it so special. Here we have Masum Khan, who shot this with a Canon EOS Kiss X4. I'm not sure what the camera here is in here in the States. It's probably a Rebel of some sort. A shot at 1/1600th of a second at f3.5 at ISO 800. So let's take a look at the light here first and foremost. We're dealing with a light that's being cut off by this building or this structure here, this wall. And so it creates this very hard line here. So it's a very, much like the previous shot, the sunlight is very hard and harsh. So that's why this line is so cleanly defined here. But it looks like it probably was shot later in the afternoon or early in the morning, because it isn't overhead. And the contrast that's created here on this wall is really interesting. It serves as the background for the action here of these boys who are playing with this ball. And so that light hits that ball, and the color of the ball, especially the green, makes it pop. And then we look at the setting. Now we have, again, the wall is really interesting in terms of the texture on the wall. Makes just for a very interesting background, as well, especially these holes in the walls, which I don't know what they're for. This interesting pattern that's created here. And then we have this interesting ground here with all this debris, including the children's shoes on the ground. So as an overall setting, this looks really, really interesting. It's very graphic. We not only have these repeating sort of rectangular shapes that are repeated throughout the frame, but as well as this triangle that's created by this play of light and shadow. And we also have a triangle here that's created on the ground. And that triangle, or repetition of triangles, is something that I've talked about before, and how the repetition of shapes, especially triangles, can add some dynamism to our overall composition. But now let's focus on the kids. And here we got this great action and this interplay between these three kids that are focused on the ball. And Masum here captures it at a really great moment where the ball is up in the air. So the attention of these three boys are completely on the ball. And the way their body language is, and especially their hands, it create this lovely triangle which point up directly to the ball. So visually, if you think of this shot very graphically, all of these things are helping us to guide our attention to the ball and the action that's happening here within the frame. But then on top of that, we have these other two children. There's one kid here in the foreground who's very aware of the camera, and his arms are crossed here. And his attention is not on the gameplay, but it's on the photographer. And it adds a really interesting element to this shot. It still, I think, would be a really neat shot with just the kids that play with this light and with the setting. But having this kid whose presence is very conscious of the camera and the photographer, I think adds something interesting. And it's balanced by this other child, this little girl in the far right of the frame, who is also very aware of the photographer and the presence of the camera. And for me, it's really interesting. I look at this shot and I go, yeah, this is really interesting action, and it's wonderful. But these two kids add something to the shot that make it special, that make it more than just three kids playing with a ball. Masum just does a marvelous job in terms of just taking control of this entire frame. I had a question about, I say things as if I knew what the photographer's intent was. I don't know what any photographer's intent is with any of these photographs. I can just sort of project what I would imagine I would be thinking about when I would be making a photograph, or have made a photograph in the past. So I'm assuming that Masum here was conscious of all these kids being in the frame and made the choice to include these kids rather than sort of shifting his position or waving the kid off and telling him to get out of the frame. The presence of all these kids, the shoes, the light, all of this stuff just comes to make a very complex and a really dynamic and interesting photograph. My eyes, may explore these kids at the edges of the frame, but I'm guided back here and I explore this stuff here. And again, there's a triangle that's created by the presence of these kids. So if you look here, you go up to the peak here, you go down here. And again, there's an implied triangle that's created in this composition, which I think is one of the reasons I look at this shot and I never get tired of looking at it. It's just a marvelous, marvelous composition. This is not easy stuff to get, and I'm not saying that everyone should sort of, expect to make shots like this, because sometimes you don't have as interesting a setting or as interesting quality of light with which to work with. But what I'm encouraging people to do is just to pay attention with what you do have to work with, because that will result in you making much more informed choices about how you photograph children at play. So we have a shot by Simon Hossain, shot with the Canon EOS 70D at 1/1600th of a second at f11, ISO 640. So here the setting is much, much different, right? We have a sand dune, we have a sky. There's not a building, there's not a structure, there's nothing like that. There's just sand dune and sky. And what makes this work so well for me is the color contrast created by the yellow and the blue. The yellow and the blue, it makes for an interesting frame. Again, take a look at this scene without the kids, and you can just see that just as an exploration of color and shape, the overall composition is really, really solid. But the kids definitely are an important element of the shot and sort of elevated from just being a scene of a static scene. Right? And then you have the gesture of the kids as they come down the dune. But before I get to that, take a look at the color of the kids in terms of their skin tone, the trunks that they're wearing, especially the kid in the foreground here with the blue and sort of orange bathing shorts. The color contrast here is just built on top of the yellow and the blue that exists and dominates the entire frame. But then the body language of the kids as they're going down the sand dunes is really dramatic. And the counterpoint to that is this more relaxed, more static positioning of the two kids here who are standing and this kid who's sitting here on the sand dune, who looks like he's been down the sand dune a couple of times, taking a look at his shorts and his legs. But these kids are really having fun. And what Simon does here really, really well is he makes such great use of negative space. I mean, the sand dunes in the sky create all this negative space. And because we don't have a lot of busyness within the frame, our focus is completely on the kids and their action and their play and then just engagement with each other. A lot of people would have just photographed the individual kids playing here, going down the sand dunes. But it's having the kids here at the top left of the frame, observing their fellow cohorts in this activity that really makes for an interesting shot. And that's another thing to think about. I mean, it's easy to just focus on the kids that are just playing, that are in the midst of this sort of key activity. But think about the other participants, the other players in the moment and in the scene, because oftentimes they are going to be observing the other ones and seeing what they're doing. And they are as much part of the story as these kids here who are rolling down the sand dune at this moment. So open yourself up. Really take a look at not only light and not only color and gesture, but take a look at everything that's happening in that frame and try to figure out, what do I want to include in it? What do I want to exclude? And how can I bring all of these things together to make a really interesting frame? And I think these three photographers do an excellent job in doing just that. So thanks. That's it. If you like what you're seeing here, you can join us here at the Candid Frame Flickr group by just going to the Candid Frame. You can just do a search here on the Candid Frame. You'll find this page, and you can just ask to be added, and I'll be glad to do just that. And you can be part of the growing community of photographers that we have here. And if you found us for the first time and you've never heard the Candid Frame podcast, well, go to thecandidframe.com, where you can listen to interviews with some of the world's best photographers. I had a recent conversation with the legendary master photographer Art Wolf, which some of you may know of. You can check it out. And we do have a Candid Frame app, so you can download it for Windows, for Apple iOS, and for Android, so you can hear the entire archive of over 300 interviews right in the palm of your hand. It's really sort of amazing. And the best thing about it, it's free. So check it out by going to thecandidframe.com. Thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next time.